Imagine writing a sci-fi novel so utterly repulsive that towering intellectuals like Hannah Arendt and Bertrand Russell were literally physically sickened by it.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
Right. And not because it was filled with, gore, and not because it was cheaply obscene either, but because the underlying structure of the book revealed this terrifying truth about human existence that the smartest people on the planet simply, well, they weren't ready to accept it.
It is a profound reaction, really, when you think about it. I mean, for a piece of text to induce literal intellectual revulsion in the minds of some of the 20th century's most formidable philosophers.
Yeah, it's wild. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking an analytical text concerning a deeply misunderstood, honestly completely baffling book published in 1957. It's called Industrial Onanism.
Such a provocative title.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And it's by this very mysterious author named Pablo J. Kickashole. Now, it was originally released in this tiny, poorly distributed, run by a now defunct imprint in Newark. And at the time, the public and academic consensus was just brutal.
Oh, they completely dismissed it.
Entirely. They called it incoherent. They said it was structurally unreadable.
Which is exactly what makes its current status so fascinating. Because when you read the retrospective analyses today, the historical consensus has completely flipped.
Wait, really? Like a total 180?
A complete 180. What was once labeled, a grotesque failure is now regarded as one of the most eerily accurate diagnostic models of modern civilization ever put to paper. I mean, it is an absolute masterpiece of anticipatory systems thinking.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the sharpest minds of 1957 threw this book across the room in absolute disgust, but, modern critics are calling it a flawless prophecy of our daily lives, we need to understand the gap. We need to figure out exactly why it was so hated back then and why it matters so much to you, the listener, right now.
To really grasp the intensity of that initial backlash, we have to pull ourselves back into the mindset of the 1950s. Like, you have to picture the post-war boom.
Right.
The defining characteristic of the cultural atmosphere was just this intense, unquestioned technological optimism. It was an age of explosive economic growth, rapid suburban expansion, and this unshakable belief that human ingenuity was, conquering the universe.
Yeah, like society felt like it was on a clear, guaranteed upward trajectory. We were rolling out the interstate highway system. We were gearing up for the space race. We were basically mass producing the American dream.
Exactly. There was a profound belief that every single machine rebuilt was a stepping stone to a utopian future.
Right.
So into that environment of pure, forward-looking optimism drops Industrial Onanism. A book that, by deliberate design, completely refused to offer any narrative resolution. It denied any moral positioning whatsoever, and it stripped away any external frame of reference.
So it's basically like, think of it like standing in the middle of the 1849 gold rush, right?
Yeah.
You are surrounded by prospectors covered in dirt, swinging pickaxes, sweating in the sun, absolutely convinced they're about to strike it rich. And you casually stroll into the center of the camp and start explaining to all the miners that, well, the concept of money is a complete illusion.
Oh, wow.
Right. You wouldn't just be ignored. You'd be violently run out of town.
That captures the friction perfectly, honestly. Because the core offense of Kickashole's work wasn't just that it was bleak or difficult to read. It was that it implied something culturally intolerable for a booming post-war society.
Which was what, exactly?
The book dared to suggest that industrial progress itself might be fundamentally meaningless. That wasn't perceived as a literary critique. It was treated as absolute heresy.
Man, that is heavy. So, since the 1950s, public essentially put their fingers in their ears and couldn't handle the premise, let's actually look at what that premise was. Our analysis breaks down the central thesis as a total shift in how we understand the operation of complex systems.
Yeah, so Kickashole introduces a concept that remains deeply destabilizing today. He argues that industrial society has managed to completely sever production from purpose.
Okay, severed production from purpose.
Right. He tracks a transition from what he calls instrumental systems,
Yeah.
which are systems explicitly designed to serve human needs, to autotelic systems.
Autotelic, meaning the goal is just the process itself, right?
Right. Snake eating its own tail.
Uh,
Kickashole argues that once a system becomes sufficiently massive and complex, it no longer produces for anything outside of itself. It produces simply because it has the capacity to produce.
wow.
It serves only its own continuation. He names this condition industrial onanism.
I want to make sure we really nail down how terrifying this is mechanically. Like, think of it like building a massive city-sized treadmill.
Hmm.
Initially, you build the treadmill so people in the city can get exercise. That's instrumental. But eventually, the treadmill gets so big and so complicated that it requires the entire society just to oil the gears, replace the belts, and monitor the power grid.
Yeah.
Within a generation, everyone forgets about exercising entirely. Their whole existence is now just dedicated to making sure the treadmill keeps spinning.
That captures the transition brilliantly. The original human purpose is just forgotten, replaced entirely by the maintenance of the mechanism. Which brings us directly to the setting of the novel itself. The entire story takes place inside a vast, automated complex that the text only ever refers to as the circuit.
The circuit. And the circuit is doing all the things you would expect a gargantuan factory to do, right?
Exactly.
It manufactures components, it actively recycles its own output, it repairs its own mechanical failures, and it constantly expands its physical footprint. But, and this is the kicker, it does all of this without any directive from a boss or a government.
No one within the narrative has any idea what the system actually produces. They don't know who it serves. They don't even know if it ever had an original purpose.
That's so unsettling.
The human workers who inhabit the circuit maintain it purely out of this inherited, unquestioned obligation.
Okay, let me push back here for a second. Because in any normal dystopian story, think 1984 or The Matrix, this is the exact setup for a grand rebellion. There is an unnamed engineer at the center of this story, right? Surely he tries to sabotage the machine or orchestrate an escape or, I don't know, at least try to wake up the other workers to the absurdity of it all.
What's fascinating here is that the protagonist is not a hero in any conventional sense. He organizes no rebellion. He attempts no sabotage.
None at all.
He doesn't even look for an exit. His only role in the novel is to perceive the reality of his environment.
He just watches it happen.
He observes. Through a series of increasingly disturbing realizations, he simply watches the system function. He watches finished output being fed directly back into raw input. He reads administrative reports that only reference other administrative reports, never referencing actual physical reality. He sees mechanical malfunctions getting corrected by processes that inherently generate new, more complex malfunctions.
So his awareness of the situation doesn't save him at all.
Not even a little bit. His dawning awareness is the exact opposite of liberating. It is completely paralyzing.
Wow. And that paralysis the engineer feels inside the story, here's where it gets really interesting, because that is exactly what you experience holding the physical book. The genius of Kickashole is that he designed the physical text to trap the reader in that exact same bureaucratic loop.
Form is function. The book doesn't just describe the circuit, it forces you to participate in it.
Yeah, the physical construction of the text is incredibly radical. It's written almost entirely as fragmented maintenance logs, technical diagrams, internal memos, and heavily redacted documents.
Which makes it so jarring to read.
Oh, totally. You aren't reading a traditional narrative with chapters and dialogue. You are literally sifting through the bureaucracy of the circuit.
And the language itself degrades as the narrative progresses. Phrases begin to repeat with slight, maddening variations. The terminology becomes completely unstable.
To give you an idea of what reading this is actually like, imagine you are reading a maintenance log from Sector 4, and it references a critical pressure failure in something called Valve C. Naturally, you want to know what Valve C is, so you flip to the technical appendix at the back of the book.
Right.
You find the entry for Valve C, and the definition just reads, refer to Sector 4 maintenance log.
You are trapped. The text ceases to describe the system and becomes indistinguishable from the system. You're no longer reading a story about a bureaucratic maze. You are actively processing the paperwork for that maze.
Which is why critics today realize this wasn't just some avant-garde stylistic experiment. It was a structural embodiment of some incredibly heavy concepts. The analysis positions the book as a hybrid of systems theory, existential philosophy, and early cybernetic thought. The text shares conceptual DNA with the bureaucratic absurdity of Franz Kafka and the recursive, loop-like logic of mathematician Kurt Gödel.
Wait, let's unpack that for a second. Let's make sure we ground these references for a bit.
Yeah.
When you say Gödel's loop-like logic, you're talking about his incompleteness theorems, right? The mathematical proof that a formal system can't prove its own consistency using its own internal rules.
Yeah, that is the exact mathematical principle Kickashole is applying to a factory setting. Gödel proved that if you stay strictly within the rules of a mathematical system, you will eventually hit a paradox, a statement that says this statement is unprovable.
Right.
Kickashole takes that mathematical boundary and turns it into a physical reality. The workers in the circuit are trapped inside a formal system. They can't understand the purpose of the factory using the language of the factory because the factory's language only refers to itself.
That's brilliant. And what about the cybernetic thought piece?
Well, cybernetics, especially in the mid-century, was all about feedback loops, how systems use the results of their own actions as inputs for their next actions. Like, a thermostat is a simple cybernetic system. It reads the room temperature, turns on the heat, reads the new temperature, and turns it off.
But the circuit is a thermostat that just keeps heating the room so it can measure how hot the room is getting forever.
Precisely. Kafka wrote about bureaucracies that crush the human spirit, but he wrote about them as external nightmares. Kickashole is writing from within the system.
Yeah, that distinction is crucial.
He immerses the reader entirely in the internal logic of a machine that has completely forgotten why it was plugged into the wall in the first place.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? We've spent time on a 1950s sci-fi concept, mathematical loops, and structural text. But the reason modern thinkers consider this book a prophecy is because Kickashole's fictional circuit is essentially your daily life.
It really is.
The modern critiques explicitly map this vision to four major pillars of contemporary reality. The retroactive influence is staggering when you look at the mechanics of our current world.
Let's walk through how this manifests today. First up, algorithmic culture. Think about modern digital platforms and social media. The entire architecture is autotelic.
Oh, absolutely. It is a closed loop of engagement. The platforms generate content, which exists solely to capture user attention, which generates behavioral data, which is then fed back into the system to generate more targeted content.
Right.
No external reality or tangible product is required for the system to thrive.
An everyday analogy for you listening, you pull your phone out of your pocket and open an app. That action creates a data point. That data point feeds an algorithm, which is instantly optimized to show you a video that will make you stay on the app longer, so you will create more data points.
Exactly.
You aren't gaining any physical nourishment, you aren't building a house, and the app isn't producing anything you can hold in your hand. You have effectively become a biological component of the circuit. You are the oil keeping the digital gears turning.
And that autotelic structure isn't just capturing our attention spans. It has entirely taken over how we assign value in the real world.
Oh.
That brings us to the second pillar, financial abstraction.
Oh man, this one is wild when you really look at it. Modern finance has almost entirely decoupled from the physical world.
Yeah, if you examine contemporary financial systems, particularly high-frequency trading and complex derivatives, you see the trading of contracts based on other contracts. A derivative is just a financial instrument whose value relies on an underlying asset. But today, we have derivatives of derivatives.
It's just layers and layers.
Enormous oceans of wealth are generated and circulated entirely detached from any material production. No steel is forged, no wheat is harvested.
It is money moving simply for the sake of moving. The ultimate realization of production without an endpoint. So we have our attention trapped in a loop, we have our global economy trapped in a loop. What about our actual daily jobs?
Well, that is the third pillar, institutional bureaucracy.
Think about the modern corporate office. Organizations today routinely produce massive amounts of documentation that is solely about their other documentation. We have meetings to plan the agendas for other meetings. We have entire departments whose only function is to maintain administrative systems that only exist to justify the existence of those departments.
The circuit is no longer a fictional thought experiment housed in a 1957 paperback. It is the literal administrative reality of the modern white-collar worker. You are filling out the maintenance logs.
Which leads us to the final and maybe most literal manifestation of Kickashole's vision, the fourth pillar, machine learning systems.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the prophecy becomes almost frighteningly exact. Modern artificial intelligence models are now routinely scraping the internet and training on text and images that were generated by similar AI systems.
Wait, so it's an artificial brain talking to an artificial brain to get better at talking to an artificial brain?
Exactly. The retrospective analysis identifies this dynamic as the very first fully realized technological form of industrial onanism, a complex system improving its own performance based entirely on internally generated data, completely severed from human input or the physical world.
Given that we are now fully living inside this autotelic reality, what is humanity's role in all this? What are we supposed to do? The book actually provides an answer through what has become its most enduring image. We have to talk about the physical cover of that original 1957 edition.
It's an incredibly potent visual metaphor, and it's widely reproduced in academic circles today. The cover illustration features a man. He looks very rational, very composed, dressed like your standard, reliable mid-century professional, and he is calmly holding a piece of a massive malfunctioning mechanical arm.
Smoke is pouring out of the gears he's holding, but the interpretation of this image is brilliant. The critics point out that the smoke is not a sign of catastrophic failure. The machine isn't blowing up.
Right, it represents continuous, manageable dysfunction.
The man isn't driving the machine. He's not steering the future. He's just stabilizing a minor component that doesn't actually depend on him anymore. He's calmly holding the smoking arm so the rest of the gargantuan factory can just keep humming along in the background. His job is just friction management.
Which brings us to the architect of this entire nightmare, the ghost in the machine himself, Pablo J. Kickashole.
What do the historical records actually tell us about him? Because reading about his life feels just as fragmented as reading his book.
He is virtually a phantom. The biographical records are highly fragmentary. We know he was born in 1912. His date of death is uncertain. Scholars usually list it with a question mark around 1983.
Right.
He authored at least 2 widely condemned works, and beyond that, there is almost nothing. No interviews, no photographs, no manifestos.
It's almost like Kickashole realized that putting his own ego and identity onto the book would give it an external anchor, an authorial intent, which would ruin the whole autotelic illusion. By fading into total obscurity by becoming a ghost, he let the book become a pure machine.
Scholars argue exactly that. His obscurity is architecturally perfect. The work doesn't need an author because it functions as a sister itself. The creator's identity is completely irrelevant to the operation of the circuit.
Which leads us to the final structural revelation of this whole deep dive. When you look at all these pieces together, the math, the bureaucracy, the modern AI loops, the critical consensus is very clear on how we should read industrial onanism today. It is not a warning. It is not a satire.
It is a structural revelation. Kickashole is demonstrating a law of physics for complex systems. He reveals that once detached from their original purpose,
Yeah.
they will sustain themselves and they will absorb human participation merely as a maintenance function.
There is a canonical last line recovered from the final redacted pages of the novel's text. It just reads, "The machine does not require us to exist, only that we continue to operate it."
It is a sobering realization. We inhabit systems that produce without purpose, circulate without destination, and persist without justification.
So, to you listening right now, we want to leave you with a provocative thought. Build on that idea of human participation as just a maintenance function. I want you to look at your own calendar today. Look at your to-do list. Scan through your emails. Think about your upcoming meetings. Look closely at the tasks demanding your energy. How many of those tasks are actually moving toward a tangible, meaningful endpoint? How many of them are building something real? And how many of them are just maintenance logs from Sector 4 that you are dutifully filling out? Are you directing your life toward a purpose, or are you just calmly holding a smoking mechanical arm to stabilize a